Out here in the Wild West, gunmen ain't hard to find. But it's a rare thing to meet someone bold enough to throw down a challenge with nothing but words, right from the very first breath. This tale begins with a strange question echoing through a silent town. Cowboy, is your mind always between my legs? Is that why you look so lost out here? It wasn't just the reckless quip of a lonely widow. It was the spark that set a whole destiny ablaze. From that moment on, the fates of Sarah Miller and the drifting cowboy Jack Colton tangled together, not with bullets, but with trials of trust and courage. But out here, where the land's dry and the wind cuts mean, does kindness still have a place? Or is it just another mask before betrayal bears its knife? Stay with me till the very end, and you'll see why one wild, shameless line opened the door to something much bigger than fate itself. The sky that morning hung low and gray, like an old sheet of tarnished silver pressing down on the crooked rooftops. The town breathed shallow, a husk of a place where the loudest sound was the rusty saloon door chains creaking in the wind. Dust skated down the empty street, curling past toppled barrels and the stamped tracks of boots gone quiet. Nobody stepped outside. The whole place carried that heavy hush, like it was bracing for something ugly about to break loose. Through the stillness came the steady but cautious steps of Sarah Miller. Slim, wrapped in a worn shawl, her face carried that constant guard of someone used to eyes burning holes in her back. Folks had branded her long ago, the abandoned widow with nothing but a shack at the edge of nowhere and a trail of debt she never asked for. She walked slow, wicker basket clutched in hand, just hoping to trade for flour, salt, maybe a scrap of cloth. But in a street this silent, each step sounded like a hammer strike. Curtains twitched, eyes peeked from windows, then vanished quick, as if her very presence was a shameful thing. On the saloon porch, a few men leaned against the beams, eyes yellowed with cheap whiskey. Their smirks curled as they looked her over. One spat, then rasped, "Back to patch up that shack of yours, Sarah? Or buying a bottle to drink yourself into the ground, like that good-for-nothing husband?" Laughter cracked sharp through the wind. Sarah bit her lip, eyes cold as steel, but her mouth stayed shut. She'd learned long ago silence was safer than swinging back. One word could turn the night into hell she couldn't fight off. But silence had its price too. Out here, a woman without a man to shield her was easy prey. She kept on walking, shoulders stiff, knuckles whitening around the basket. The air thickened, heavy as lead. A gust tore her hair loose, slapped it across her cheek. The saloon sign groaned on its chain, creaking like a gallows rope. From the far end of the street came the slow thud of hooves. Dust rose behind a lone rider. Jack Colton, unknown to every ear in town, but his presence alone cut the street's breath short. Hat brim low, jaw shadowed by rough stubble, coat faded and boots cracked with miles of hard road. His horse was gaunt, ribs showing, but it still carried him steady down the dead man's path. The jeering men went quiet, watching, wary curiosity in their eyes. Sarah stopped by the general store porch, basket clutched tight, unease rising in her chest. Strangers out here seldom brought blessings. They came chasing blood debts, or running from them, or just ghosts in search of somewhere to bleed. Jack reined up by the pump, worked the handle with quiet ease. Water splashed clean and cold in the desert heat. No greetings, no questions. Just the silence of a man who'd seen too much to waste words on small talk. Sarah's fear twisted, hardening into defiance. She refused to let weakness be the only thing folks saw in her. Her voice cut sharp through the stillness. "Cowboy, is your mind always between my legs? Is that why you look so lost out here?" The whole street froze. Faces appeared at windows. Men in the saloon leaned forward, grinning, waiting for the old dance to begin. A crude comeback. Maybe worse, a swagger toward her that would end in shame. But Jack didn't play. He stood there, hands still damp with rusty water, eyes drifting not to her body, but to the horizon bleeding yellow with dust. And for a heartbeat, Sarah's chest trembled with something foreign, because instead of lust or scorn, she was met with calm. And that small mercy hit harder than cruelty ever had. The saloon porch rattled with laughter again. "Colton's gone soft," one man sneered, puffing his cigar. "Ain't the gunslinger he used to be. Lost his fire." Their chuckles masked unease. Every man who knew the name Jack Colton knew the truth. The beast that sleeps is the one you fear most. Sarah bit her lip. The insults stung her more than they did him. Anger rose hot in her chest, not for herself, but for the stranger who'd shielded her dignity with nothing but silence. Jack didn't rise to their bait. He simply turned, slow and tired, toward his horse. And then the saloon doors banged wide. Metal clinked. Out stepped Hank Derringer, clean-shaven and cruel-eyed, the man who ruled this patch of dirt with whiskey and cards, who'd tried more than once to bend Sarah beneath his boot. "Jack Colton," his voice thundered down the street. "You think you can play the hero and walk free? Around here, any man who touches what's mine pays the price." Hot wind roared, doors slammed shut, curtains dropped. The street hollowed into silence, all eyes hidden. Sarah stood rigid, fear flashing with a flicker of hope. She knew this moment every man before had walked away, or worse, bowed to Hank's will. Would Jack do the same? He turned back, sunlight carving shadows across the worn lines of his face. No words, just a look strong enough to choke the air. Hank's men shifted, hands on. Gun butts. The town braced, waiting for the first crack of gunfire. Sarah clung to her basket, heart pounding. For the first time in forever, she felt her fate, and maybe the town's too, resting in the hands of a man who'd once sworn never to draw again. The desert wind screamed, whipping dust into the dying light. Jack Colton lifted his chin, as if destiny itself had dragged him to this crossroads. Walk away, or stay, and carve his legend into the bones of this town. If it were you, whose side would you stand on? Gaped Sarah Miller, the strong yet scarred widow. B. Jack Colton, the silent drifter, or someone else entirely. Leave a comment and let me know you're still riding along with this story. The desert wind picked up, rushing through the dust-choked street. The saloon sign groaned on its chain, the clang of iron sharp as ice. Sarah pulled her thin shawl tighter, but the threadbare cloth did little to keep the chill from biting through her skin. She backed under the awning of the general store, her eyes fixed on the stranger still standing by the water pump. Jack Colton said nothing. He simply folded his dark coat over one arm, then, without warning, laid it across Sarah's shoulders. The gesture was so natural it made her freeze. The fabric was rough, heavy with the smell of dust and gunpowder, but it draped warm over her narrow frame. For a split second, she wanted to shove it off. For years, she'd taught herself to keep every man's hand at arm's length. But the wind sliced harder, and pride wasn't near enough to keep out the cold of this land. Her gray eyes lifted, meeting his. No lust there. No prying judgment like the others in town. Just a weary gaze, the kind of tired that comes from seeing too much, remembering more than a man ever wants to. His silence wasn't a challenge. It was a wall, old, thick, worn by time, sealing off whatever ghosts trailed him. Sarah adjusted the coat, holding herself stiff, yet deep inside a strange ease stirred. Wary, yes, but lighter, too. For the first time in longer than she could recall, she felt the presence of a man that didn't carry danger in its shadow. Neither spoke. Their eyes touched, then slipped away. Jack drew a small knife from his belt, bent to tighten his saddle straps. The way his hands moved, clean, precise, as if forged by long habit, caught Sarah's glance. It pulled her mind to lonely nights patching roof tin, sewing rips, fighting the desert storms alone. She'd thought herself past breaking more than once. The wind carried the scents of tobacco, dust, and old horsehide. Sarah turned her face aside, though her eyes strayed back to the quiet cowboy. The longer she watched, the clearer it became. Jack Colton wasn't cut from the same cloth as the loafers who lived off whiskey and mockery. He stood firm in silence, not boasting, not baiting. A hesitation bloomed in her chest. Could silence just this once mean safety instead of threat? Or was it only the calm before another storm? Something stretched between them, taut, unseen, like a wire pulled thin. No words, only glances. Yet in that space, a fragile seed of something different planted itself inside her. The road home blazed with red dust under the sinking sun. Sarah walked ahead, back straight, but shoulders trembling. Behind her, Jack led his horse at a steady clop of iron on hardpan. She had meant to leave him there in town, a stranger in the dust. But when she turned away, her feet refused to carry her alone. One small nod, that was all it took. A wordless invitation. Her cabin came into view, tilting and beaten, one storm away from falling flat. Tin roof mottled with rust, boards gone gray and warped, the front door sagging on a hinge that screamed every time it swung. Sarah stopped on the porch, arms folded, gaze sharp as a test. She wanted to see if he'd sneer, if he'd mock like all the rest. Just one curl of contempt on his lip, and she'd send him packing. But Jack didn't sneer, didn't smile, didn't say a thing. He went straight to the door, crouched low to study the hinge. His calloused fingers traced the crack. From his saddlebag he drew a scrap of wire and a bent nail. Sarah frowned, ready to demand what he thought he was doing, yet held her tongue as his movements practiced. Sure. He drove the nail, twisted the wire, tightened it with that same knife. No wasted motion. Every strike meant. And Sarah knew, watching him, this wasn't his first time fixing what was broken. Those hands weren't made for killing alone. They'd worked iron and fire. They'd built, not just destroyed. Once upon a time, this cowboy had been a blacksmith. A trade of survival, yes, but also of shaping new things from ruin. In a few short turns, the door stood straighter, opened without its death-rattle scream. Sarah stared, chest hollowing out. Something cracked inside her guard. Memory swept in. Her father hammering boards into place against the wind, sealing the house safe while she stood by, small and certain he could hold back the world. That feeling, long buried, returned now with this silent stranger. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, glanced up and muttered only 2 words. Better now. Sarah pressed her lips tight. Holding back words she refused to let loose. But her eyes betrayed her, a flicker of gratitude shining through. They stood there, side by side, before the mended door, with the empty sky stretching wide above. No more needed to be said. The silence spoke plenty. If it were you, whose side would you stand on? A. Sarah Miller, the wary widow, alone yet longing for shelter. B. Jack Colton, the silent drifter, once a blacksmith, now a man whose hands still know how to mend. Or someone else altogether. Leave a comment. Let me know you're still riding with this story. Inside the small cabin, the oil lamp threw out a frail yellow glow, trembling as if one good breath might snuff it out. On the scarred, wooden table, Sarah set down a bowl of bean stew so thin the bottom shimmered in the firelight. It was all she had left for supper, yet she still ladled half into another cracked wooden bowl for Jack. He sat silent, broad shoulders casting long shadows on the wall. No complaint, no demanding look. Just bent his head and ate spoon by spoon, slow, steady, like a man too used to hunger to mock what little was there. Sarah watched him, something unnameable stirring in her chest. Most men she'd known would have grumbled or sneered at a meal this poor, but not him. He ate in silence, as if each bean carried weight worth respecting. When they finished, Sarah rose to clear the bowls, only to see Jack already reaching. Without a word, he carried them outside to the well. She stood at the door, watching his back in the silver moonlight as he dipped water, scrubbing the bowls clean with calloused hands. Cold water sparkled, dripping through the night air. The act was nothing, simple as dirt, yet it clenched something tight inside Sarah. Not because the dishes came clean, but because for the first time in a long time, someone had met her as an equal. The night wind swept in, sharp with desert chill. Sarah pulled close the coat he'd laid on her shoulders earlier that day. Outside, Jack leaned his rifle against the porch post, then sat on the steps. His figure vanished into the dark, save for the glint of steel catching moonlight. He sat unmoving, eyes fixed on the barren stretch beyond, where the hills cut black shapes against the pale sky. On the sagging bed inside, Sarah lay down, but sleep never came. Questions turned in her head. Was she a fool to let a stranger so near? Was his silence safety, or only a storm waiting to break? Every time the wind howled through the cracks, every time a coyote's cry echoed from the ridge, her heart kicked hard against her ribs. But beneath that chaos, another rhythm grew clear. The steady breathing of Jack Colton outside the door. Not the drunken snore of a man lost in sleep, but the measured breath of someone awake, keeping watch. Every soft click of his rifle bolt in the night was a warning, yes, but also a strange, unexpected comfort. The broken cabin, the poor supper, the distant cries of wild things, it all painted the harsh picture of her life. And yet, for the first time in months, Sarah realized she wasn't bearing the night alone. Dawn bled pale through the gaps in the boards, laying thin stripes of light across the dirt floor. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, fists clutching her dress hem, breath heavy with words she'd buried too long. Jack was still there on the porch, upright, rifle across his knees, not gone, not asleep, just steady as the horizon itself. Her voice cracked the silence, low, rough, trembling but firm. "Do you know, before you came, I nearly lost my life right here in this cabin. The man they called my husband didn't just leave me. He left debts and bruises, and then vanished, like he'd never been real." The words fell heavy, like stones dropped in a dry well. Sarah lifted her face, gray eyes shining with both defiance and hurt. Jack didn't turn at once, but his grip on the rifle tightened. His reply rolled out slow, voice deep as rocks tumbling down a canyon. "You ain't the only one left with things nobody wanted to carry. I've been running too. For years, I've had no home. Got posters nailed up in 3 counties with my name on 'em, for a gunfight I didn't start." Sarah tilted her head, eyes locked on him. Jack went on, each word like a knot pulled loose. "He was drunk. Drew first. I didn't have a choice, pull or die. I walked away breathing, but the papers only carried my name, so I left. Kept leaving." Sarah's chest tightened. Memories struck fast. One summer night. The reek of whiskey, crude laughter at the market. A thug's hand on her wrist. The scar it left when he struck her down. That same thug shot dead in the alley, gossip said, by a nameless cowboy no one ever saw again. Now, sitting before her in the breaking dawn, Jack Colton. He didn't know, but she did. Her heart churned in storm, old hate colliding with strange gratitude. If not for that bullet, the man who scarred her might have come back, might have broken her again. That truth cut jagged, both wound and salvation, a blade splitting her in two. The cabin fell silent, save for the wind hissing through the cracks. Sarah swallowed hard, locking the knowledge inside. She wouldn't speak it. Not yet. Some truths, spoken, couldn't be taken back. For now, silence was the only way to keep them both sitting there, still breathing the same air. If it were you, whose side would you stand on? A. Sarah Miller, the woman who found a bitter truth but still longs for a shoulder to lean on. B. Jack Colton, the drifter who carries both the shadow of her pain and the hand that unknowingly freed her. Or would you choose another path? Leave a comment. Let me know you're still riding with this story. The afternoon sun poured down hard, burning the dirt road into gold fire. Sarah sat on the porch, weary hands patching a scrap of cloth. Out in the yard, Jack cut rope in silence, tightening the gate of the horse pen. The fragile peace between them shattered at the pounding of hooves rolling in from the distance. A lone rider rose against the red dust horizon. His horse was well fed, tack shining like coin, wealth on 4 legs, out of place in a starving town. The man wore a long coat, wide hat tilted back, pale face sharp with arrogance. He yanked the reins, halting right before the cabin, sending dust swirling in a choking cloud. Sarah sprang to her feet, heart seizing with an old, familiar dread. The memory of men barging in to claim what wasn't theirs clawed back to life. The rider leaned low, pulled a wrinkled paper from his coat, and tossed it to the porch. His voice carried like a bell, each word dragged long to make certain the wind spread it far. This land, this shack, it belongs to its rightful owner. Your husband signed the debt years back. Stay past this week, and fire'll do the talking. Sarah snatched up the page, fingers trembling. The signature, her husband's, burned at the bottom. Yet her eye caught the falsehoods quick. Thin paper, no seal, no judge's mark. Still, shame and fear clawed up her chest, no less cruel for knowing the trick. Before she could speak, Jack stepped forward. He took the paper from her hand, gave it one glance and said, voice low but solid as iron, "This is worthless. No county seal, no clerk's stamp, just ink spilled by a drunk. Carry it to court if you want to laugh. They'll spit it back in your face." The rider's brow arched. He hadn't expected a drifter to cut him off. His eyes narrowed, voice dropping like the cocking of a gun. "Maybe you don't understand how things work here, Colton. Out here it ain't ink that settles claims. It's guns and fire." Jack didn't flinch. Shoulders squared, hand hanging close to the worn silver at his hip. His gaze never left the man. The yard froze in a silence heavy enough to choke. Even the wind held its breath. After a beat, the rider smirked, jerked the reins, and turned his horse. "Fine. I'll be back. Next time, I'll bring the fire." Dust trailed behind as he galloped away, his threat hanging in the air like smoke. Sarah stood stiff, clutching her dress tight. Her heart hammered wild with fear, but deep within she realized something new. For the first time in years, she wasn't staring down a threat alone. Morning came with pale light and a film of dust on the road to town. Sarah rode her ragged horse, the paper stuffed deep in her cloth satchel. Jack kept pace beside her, his mount steady and quiet as its master. Neither spoke. Only hoofbeats and breath marked their way, heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. Marshal Hayes's office stood worn and gray, its sign faded to ghost paint. Sarah drew tight on the reins at the steps. Inside, tobacco smoke clung thick to the old wood. Behind the desk sat a man with steel-gray eyes carved deep by years. He looked at Sarah once, but his gaze locked longer on Jack Colton. "You..." His voice rasped with gravel, half surprise, half memory. Sarah frowned, confusion tightening her face. Jack only nodded, stone-faced as ever. The marshal lifted the paper, read slow, turned it over in his hands. His finger tapped a steady beat on the table edge. Finally, he exhaled, words flat and final. "Worthless. No county seal, no stamp. Old Rollins's game. He sold land with fake papers more times than I can count. Now he's trying it on you. Relief brushed Sarah's chest, but worry stayed rooted. What caught her sharper, though, was the way Hayes kept looking at Jack. Not like Law staring at a drifter, like a man staring at his own past. "You haven't changed much, Colton," Hayes Wasson said, brows furrowed. "I still remember that night in Santa Rosa. Blood all over the floor. I drove you out, swore I'd never let you back." Sarah turned to Jack, eyes wide with questions. But Jack stayed silent, his jaw set like stone. The past he'd kept buried had been dragged into daylight here, between these four walls. The marshal leaned back, gaze still fixed. "That night, I thought you were no better than the killers drifting on blood and whiskey. But today I saw different. You stood between her and the man threatening her. And this woman," his eyes cut to Sarah, "clearly trusts you more than she trusts herself." The air strung taut, every word drawn like a bow. Then Hayes nodded once, slow, set the paper down flat. "This time, I'll stand with you. Rollins has gone too far. But remember this, Colton. Santa Rosa's blood still stains my memory. Don't give me reason to regret it." Sarah gripped her dress hem, heart pounding. For the first time, she saw a man who once cast Jack out now side with him. It was a sign of change, but also a warning. The ghosts of the past weren't done yet. If it were you, whose side would you stand on? A. Sarah Miller, the woman clinging to the last scrap of land she calls her own. B. Jack Colton, the cowboy with blood in his past, now standing as her shield. Or someone else entirely? Leave a comment. Let me know you're still writing this story. The sky blackened in the blink of an eye. Storm clouds piled thick from the west, crushing down over the barren ridges. Wind screamed across the yard, flinging red dust against the cabin. Sarah clutched the doorframe, heart pounding hard. She knew desert storms well enough, but each one hit like a beast, tearing land and memory alike to shreds. The first blast rattled the tin roof, groaning like it meant to rip loose. Sarah rushed inside, bracing chairs and tables against the walls, but the wind only howled louder. Then came the rain, heavy, hammering, each drop like a stone striking iron. Water seeped through cracks, tracing dark veins across the dirt floor. Every crash of thunder dragged old ghosts back. Sarah was there again. Nights with her husband's fists, the door slamming, his voice shouting, blows landing until she curled tight in fear. Each shriek of tin above felt like knuckles slamming down. Her chest heaved, breath ragged. She clung to the coat Jack had given her, whispering to herself, "It's only Storm, no fists, no one else here, just me and him." The door burst open, wind tearing through. Jack staggered in, rain-soaked and fierce. Without a word, he grabbed a hammer and coil of rope, then plunged back into the tempest. Sarah cried out, but the storm swallowed her voice. His shadow vanished onto the roof. Hammer strikes cracked through the gale, each blow sharp, deliberate, defying the chaos. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, eyes straining through the sheets of rain. Lightning split the sky, and in the kamutut, white flash, she saw him, crouched on the roof, wrestling tin and rope against the raging wind. One slip, one wrong foothold, and the storm would take him whole. Her chest knotted with fear, not just of the storm, but of losing something she hadn't dared hope for in years. A man who stayed, who fought for her roof instead of tearing it down. Hot tears mingled with cold rain on her cheeks. She couldn't look away. At last Jack dropped back down, breath ragged, shoulders dripping. He shoved the door closed, braced his weight against it, and turned to her. No swagger in his eyes, only grim resolve. The roof still shook, but it held. Sarah pressed a hand to her chest, pulse racing wild. For the first time in years, she wasn't facing the storm alone. The night dragged on, storm pounding without mercy. Wind clawed every crack, rain thrashed the tin like drumbeats of war. Inside, Sarah and Jack fought to hold the cabin together, him nailing boards across the windows, her setting pots beneath the leaks. Their movements fell into rhythm, unspoken, each step meeting the other's need against the storm's fury. The cabin became a frail ship adrift on black seas. Sarah trembled, sweat and rain mixing on her back. Each time the walls shuddered, her mind lurched back to those nights under her husband's cruelty. But this time was different. This time the man beside her didn't strike her down or abandon her. He stood beside her, shoulder against the gale. In the frenzy of patching and bracing, Sarah slipped, crashing hard into a loose floorboard. Wood split with a dry crack. A plank popped free, exposing a hollow beneath. In the flicker of the oil lamp, something glinted. Metal. Long and cold. She reached trembling fingers in and pulled it out. A revolver, old and scarred. The silver barrel worn. The stock carved deep with one word. Colton. Her blood froze. Eyes wide, throat locked. This cabin. It wasn't just some stray shelter she'd clung to. It had once been Jack's family home. And her husband, the man who left her broken and in debt, must have stolen it with his lies. Sarah's hands shook around the gun. She lifted her gaze to Jack. He was bent over the door, hair dripping, muscles straining to hold it shut against the wind, unaware of what she'd found. And in that moment, her heart split. Between the brutal truth uncovered and the man risking his life to keep these walls standing for them both. The storm roared, but inside she heard only her own heartbeat. She could scream, confront him, tear the silence apart. Instead, she slid the gun back into the hollow, pulled the board into place, sealing it tight. This wasn't the night to unleash a second storm. Jack turned, lamplight catching in his dark eyes. He asked only one word, voice low through the thunder. "You all right?" Sarah pressed her lips, nodded faintly. Inside, her soul churned, torn between betrayal and something far stranger. This cabin had never truly been hers. But if Jack had lost it once, now he stood beside her, fighting to keep it upright. Destiny, twisted cruel, bound them both to the same scarred roof. Outside, the storm's rage waned at last. Rain thinned, wind fell quiet. The cabin, battered and scarred, still stood. Sarah slumped against the wall, breath ragged. Jack settled on the porch, rifle across his knees, eyes still scanning the night. Both drained, both worn raw. Yet between them stretched an unseen rope, pulled taut, binding them tighter than either storm or secret could break. If it were you, whose side would you stand on? A.O. Sarah Miller, the woman who just unearthed a bitter truth in the very house she calls home. B. Jack Colton, the cowboy whose past was stolen, now fighting to guard it beside her. Or another path entirely? Leave a comment. Let me know you're still writing this story. After the storm, the land smelled washed clean. Dawn spilled pale light across streaks of mud, the air damp and sharp, rare and pure. Sarah's cabin still stood, tilted a little more, scarred a little deeper, but standing. The tin sheets clung stubborn to the roof. The windows rattled yet unbroken. Sarah stepped onto the porch, breathing deep, her shoulders finally easing for the first time in days. By the horse pen, Jack patted the neck of the scrawny mare, his coat still damp, his hands rough and steady. He looked calm, like a man long used to facing storms, whether in the sky or in his soul. Hoofbeats sounded across the wet dirt. Dust rose light and low. Marshal Hayes rode in, tall frame shadowed under a wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted slow, boots sinking into the sodden ground. Sarah held her breath, waiting on whatever news he carried. "Rollins is in irons," the marshal said flat, his voice deep and certain. "Tried passing fake land papers to a cattle buyer out of Santa Fe. Evidence is enough to put him in front of a judge. This time he won't be coming back." Sarah's knees near gave way. All the years of fear, men at her door with forged debts, nights wondering if her cabin would be burned to ash, fell away in a rush. Her voice shook, yet rang clear. "Then, this place is mine. Truly mine." The marshal nodded, gaze steady. "That's right. No one can take it now." Sarah turned to the cabin, eyes shining. What once felt like a burden now glimmered with the promise of a home. Her gaze slid to Jack. He stood silent, broad shoulders dusted with dried mud, eyes unreadable, as though he was ready to mount on at any second. She drew a breath, fingers clenching her dress, and spoke. Slow, steady, loud enough to carry through the soft morning wind. "You could keep moving, or stay." The words trembled in the air, heavier than the storm. Her heart hammered, for she'd never invited a man to stay, not since the day she'd been left behind. Jack was quiet a long time. Wind stirred his tangled hair. At last, he lifted his head, dark eyes deep as canyon shadow, and said hoarse, "I'm tired of running. If you'll have me, I'll stay." Sarah trembled, but a fragile smile touched her lips. Inside, the cold emptiness of the desert at last gave way to warmth. The cabin still stood, and this time, she wasn't holding it alone. The next day, sunlight blazed across a land scrubbed raw by storm. Sarah and Jack worked side by side to mend the cabin. Words weren't needed. Each knew their part. Jack split new boards, driving nails with heavy, sure hands. Every strike of the hammer sounded like a promise. Sarah gathered broken scraps, swept the mud from the porch, cleared the yard clean. For the first time, the cabin wasn't just her burden. It was theirs. By noon, they stood together at the doorway, newly fixed. Jack pulled his knife, its edge worn smooth by time. He glanced at Sarah. "We ought to carve something here, so folks know this place is kept." She hesitated, then nodded. The knife bit deep into the wood, letter by letter. SM and JC. Plain marks. But to Sarah, they cut brighter than any seal of law. For the first time, her name stood beside another's, etched into the frame of a home, not just whispered in the wind. Evening fell quiet. Sarah lit the hearth, the smell of thin stew rising with the smoke. Jack braced the stable with fresh timber, then carried a cot inside. No longer a lone shadow on the porch, no rifle clenched through the night. He lay within reach, only a thin wall between them. That night, Sarah slipped under her blanket without clutching a gun to her chest. Instead, her hand rested soft on the quilt's edge. Her heartbeat slowed. Her eyes drifted closed. Beside her, Jack's breathing was steady, warm presence filling the space that had once been only emptiness. Outside, the western night spread its sky thick with stars, and in the vast silence, Sarah's cabin glowed with a single oil lamp. Its light flickered in the window, small, trembling, but unyielding. Not a ruin anymore, but a home, held upright by two hands and two hearts that had known too much loss. To a passing traveler, it was just a shack on a barren plain. But to Sarah Miller and Jack Colton, it was proof of rebirth. A place to stay. A place to trust again. A place where loneliness no longer ruled. And so the story closes on that image. A cabin burning steady against the dark. A light of defiance, of hope. Of two souls choosing to stand. Not broken, not alone. Not beaten by storm or past. Out here in the West, where wind and dust chew through all things, one small cabin endured, not by timber and nails alone, but by two battered souls who found each other. Sarah no longer faced her fears alone. Jack no longer drifted with nothing but ghosts at his back. They chose to stay, to build, to strike a match against the dark. Maybe all of us carry scars of the past. Maybe all of us have known long, lonely nights. But sometimes, it only takes one hand reaching out at the right moment. And even the fiercest storm can be weathered. So I'll ask you, if it were you, would you keep on riding into the horizon? Or would you stay, to guard one small place, fragile yet warm, and call it home? Leave your thoughts below. And if this tale struck a chord, hit that like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next ride through the frontier. Thanks for riding along.